And we're going to discuss today the topic of double dipping, sometimes called double counting, and really we'll have a bit of a procurement perspective on this. I'm going to get the discussion going and introduce a couple of thoughts and some ideas, and then we can open up the discussion. So just to kick off, where does this notion of double dipping come from? It really is primarily applied in the context of people receiving some income, where you might be getting both a pension as well as a government salary from two insurers for the same loss, or from two insurers for the same loss. So that's technically where it is often discussed. And sorry, let me just quickly find the space there. Sometimes even brokers might put a commission product, so a product that they would get commission on, inside a fee-based account where they're actually getting a fee for the work that they're doing. So they're actually earning money from both sources for the same work that they're doing. And that's typically is termed double dipping. There were, interestingly enough, in the COVID space, a number of AG findings where double dipping occurred, primarily from an income perspective as well. And you could see in this particular example, they spoke here about looking at different applications for COVID rebates and COVID income, and found that there was an issue there. There was also quite a bit that happened in the UIF, where people were claiming for both normal UIF income as well as TERS income. And that was considered to be double dipping. So there are many areas where double dipping is discussed in the income space. Now, in a procurement space, it is also often referred to as double counting. And this is one particular extract from UK government commercial function, where they talk about evaluation criteria must be distinct from the other evaluation criteria to avoid double counting. We'll get to some examples of this. I was involved in a project for a couple of weeks, just with some international folk. And in this particular one, we're exploring different preference systems that exist globally, and just was interesting to see how in the Wales government, they've got a very, very strong focus on a whole range of social outcomes and measures for that. And just to see that they have also a very, very strong focus in their measures to ensure that there's no double counting but between specific measures. So this is exactly as we have in our preference system. They have a preference system as well. In this particular one measure, they've got many measures here. This is to promote local skills and employment. And they, again, just want to be sure that there's no double counting in that respect. Now, internationally, in public procurement, there's a very, very widely accepted principle, which is sometimes termed a distinction between selection criteria and award criteria. And I'll unpack the selection and award criteria quite soon. But what does this mean? Distinction means there's a difference. There's got to be a difference between the criteria used to select and the criteria used to award. Selection criteria used to assess the tenderer's ability to perform the proposed contract in order to shortlist bidders. Selection criteria are used during the selection stage. Sometimes this is called the shortlisting stage. Now, remember, this is international, and so they refer to a term here called the most economically advantageous tender. Sometimes they use the acronym MEET, and that's award criteria. It's used to decide the most economical tender and the final award. So there's a shortlisting, and then there's the award. Selection criteria should not be used as award criteria. Selection criteria should not be used as award criteria, as this may provide a bidder with a greater level of advantage than may be considered fair. And they refer here to the European Court of Justice to a clear distinction between selection award criteria under the public procurement rules. And there are various sources that I've quoted here just to back this up. It is a globally accepted principle, which interestingly enough has also been built into the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act. So let's have a quick look at this principle and what this means. There are multiple stages that we go through in the evaluation process, and here, just to try and describe what we've just said, is there's an evaluation stage 1 and an evaluation stage 2. In this particular example, using that internationally accepted principle of a distinction between selection and award, we say the selection process is the first stage and the award process is the second stage. And when they say that there must be a distinction, they're saying that if you use a criterion in the selection stage, you should not use the same criterion in the award stage. It needs to be different. If it is the same and somebody benefits from the first criterion A to get them selected, it will be considered double dipping if you use the same criterion in award, because they will then get double the benefit for the same criterion. And that would be considered double dipping. Now, if we look at the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act, it talks about a series of your stages in this. The Organ of State must develop a preferential procurement policy, and then they have a framework and A, B, C, D, E, and F. And then F, it says the contract must be awarded to the tenderer that scores the highest points unless objective criteria is used to justify the award to another tenderer. So let's have a look at one aspect of this. And it's interesting to see that the National Treasury attempted to build into the guideline controls to help people ensure that they don't double dip. And in the implementation guideline, they said that if you intend to use objective criteria, you must state that in the tender documents. You must state what those objective criteria are in the tender documents. And then it said in the implementation guide that functionality and any element of the PPP scorecard may not be used as objective criteria. Now, this is not stated anywhere in the regulation. This is only stated in the implementation guide. And as we know, the implementation guide is a guide. It does not constitute legislation. And what they were attempting to do, National Treasury was attempting to do with this, was to try and ensure that double counting or double dipping is avoided. But this reference to functional criteria actually is in a way incomplete. It's actually incorrect. That reference to say you may not use functionality as an objective criteria actually has no place in law. It is trying to avoid double counting. And in fact, there are a number of different cases that exist. And if you're at all interested in this topic, I would recommend that you read Advocate Helen Fenter's case, where she argues that functionality indeed must be considered in the final award of a bid to a particular bidder. And she's based that primarily on the Rainbow Civils case. And the Rainbow Civils case was a really interesting one, where the organ of state calculated the price and the triple BE score, and then they gave it to the one that scored the highest functional points. Interesting. And that was challenged. It went into the court system. I think it went as far as the Supreme Court of Appeal, and the Supreme Court of Appeal said that was the right thing to do. It was not wrong to bring that functional score into the final decision to award. Now, if we take this a little bit further, and I'm going to open up the discussion, the chat is open if anyone is keen to submit any comments on the chat as we go. I think there are at least 3 different stages, possibly 4, but I'm not going to bring the 4th one into this discussion today. There are 3 different evaluation stages when you unpack the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act. The first one is the stage where we decide whether the bidder is acceptable or not. And that is in section 1 under definitions. There's a definition there of what an acceptable tender is. And those who've been around for a while will know that the idea of an acceptable tender is used throughout the regulations, to decide if they have met the threshold on the functional score. If they have, then all acceptable tenders must move through to the next stage, is what the regulation says. So acceptable tender is that first stage, if you like, in the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act. The next stage then is an award criteria, where it says we will then award to the one that scores the highest points. We'll award to the one that scores the highest points. And I'm just going to quickly ask him, I'm going to just make Henry a co-host here so he could just mute people if they do come online. So we then award to the one that scores the highest points. Then there is a third one. And that third one I've just alluded to now is where we then bring in objective criteria. And we then, using the PPPFAct section 2.1f, to award it to someone who may not have scored the highest points. So I'm just using this now as a framework for this discussion. And I'm going to share with you some ideas around what the criterion could be going forward for those particularly who are interested in developing a preferential procurement policy, what it could be, and why this principle of double dipping or double counting is something to consider in that process. So the notion of ensuring that there's a distinction becomes important in this stage, is that if we do use a criterion A, I'll give some examples shortly, then that A cannot be used for stage 2 and it cannot be used for stage 3. We've got to make sure that the criterion on each of those stages is different. That's the key principle. The criterion must be different. Don't get hung up about that implementation guide and the reference to functionality. The principle is the criterion must be different. So let's say here, and this is just a little example here to say, is certainly you cannot use a criterion A if you use that in stage 1. That would not be correct to do that. Here's an example of what it could be, and we'll look at criterion A, B, and C here. Criterion A might be track record, for example. Criterion B might be the triple BE and the price score. Those are 2 criteria there that comes up with a score, being the triple B and price score, the total score. Criterion C then, the objective criteria, could be sustainability. It could be one of the UN's sustainability criteria. It could be one of them. It could be the whole lot. It could be a sustainability score that you have. But there is nothing wrong in you putting together an objective criteria which is, if you like, functional. But as long as sustainability is not used in the first stage, it would be acceptable for you to use it as an objective criteria. But what about something like Black women? So we'll go through the process, we'll look at track record, we will look at PPP score and the price score, and then we'll say, however, we're going to give it to the one that has the most Black women ownership. Problem, because Black woman is used in the scoring of the PPP scores. And that would then break that rule, because a Black woman organization would score well on the PPP scorecard, and it would be double counting and double dipping if they then were to score well again on criterion C, where you were to use Black women. And this is why the implementation guide said that you may not use any PPPE criteria as objective criteria, because it basically is an issue of double dipping. Here's another one that you should not do, is say, okay, we're going to look at track record or any functional criteria, PPP in price score, and then we're going to give it to the best EME company. Again, a problem, because EME is used in determining the PPP score of an organization. Let's look at this one. So track record, PPP and price score, and location. Interesting. Those involved in local government will know that for many years we've had a problem that we have not been able to use location in the process. There's nothing stopping us using location as an objective criteria. It's very objective. We just got to make sure that this criteria is indeed measurable. It is objective. And we could use that then to say, okay, we're going to go through, we'll do the functional scoring, we'll look at the PPP score and the price score. But then if we make our final decision, and we've got somebody from the Western Cape and somebody from Gauteng, if I'm a municipality in the Western Cape, my final decision would be to give it to the one that's in the Western Cape. Here's another example. Track record. Hey, what about PPPE and location and price score? So starting to suggest here that when we are thinking about our policies, we do not need to stick with just the PPPE scorecard as a basis for the 10 and the 20 score under the new world that we're going to have as soon as there's some clarity on the 2017 preferential procurement regulations. PPPE and location could be one, and then price. So you could actually bring location into the scoring process for the points. I see your hand there, Henry. And then the final objective criteria might be innovation. Yeah, go ahead, Henry.
You kind of mentioned, Sean, but I just wanted to stress again. So, sure. And I agree with you on this. I just wanted to say, maybe hold on to that location thing until the Constitutional Court gave clarity in terms of the suspension, the invalidity period. Yeah. So
thanks, Ellie. Absolutely, good one. Good one. This is all under the assumption that we're developing a new world for preference under either the new 2022 preferential procurement regulations, or even if there's no 2022 preferential procurement regulations, but there's no validity period. Absolutely, that would be it. So here is another example where you could bring in something like, hey, we'll look at all the functional criteria. We'll look at this scoring of preference points, be it BE and location and price or other aspects that we might have, and then we'll bring in innovation, as long as, this is the point of this discussion, and I'm concluding my little monologue here right now. The point is that you need to avoid double dipping. If you use location as an award criteria, don't use location in the first stage. If you use location as an award criteria, don't use location for objective criteria. If you use innovation for objective criteria, be sure you don't use innovation as, if you like, a functional criteria. That's my monologue. And I see there's a good question that Karabo has asked. What would be an empowering legislation that supports location so that it's not challenged constitutionally? Karabo, you can unmute. What would be an empowering legislation that supports location so that it's not challenged constitutionally? If we're talking under the fact that there is no 2017 regulations, then there's no legislation that prohibits you from using location. And Karabo, I don't know if you recall, but the 2001 regulations that came out in 2001 actually allowed you to use location as an award criteria. But when we moved into the 2011 regulations and we then used the BBBE scorecard to decide the 10 and the 20 points, then it wasn't possible for us to bring in location. So there's nothing that prohibits you. There's no legislation that says you may not use location at the moment. And in fact, if you were to look then at the 2001 regulations there, it was quite clear that you could use location at that point. So maybe that's the closest that we've got to answer that point, Karabo. That's a great point. I know that it's a major issue in local government. All right. Any other thoughts? Is this making sense? I think that this is probably going to be the quickest Wednesday 10 o'clock session we've ever had. All right, I think that's it then. There we are, Geraldine. This is going to be quick and easy. Let's just quickly go back again and just leave this particular slide on. Go ahead, Henry.
Well, I'm kind of in two minds here. And we had that discussion I think we had this discussion before. So I kind of agree with, from a business perspective, I agree on the principle in that court case, the one that you showed earlier on, right? So I agree on that. And as we know, a lot of institutions worldwide are using like a kind of a combination of, let's call it functionality and price as a weighting factor. But so I agree with kind of where they were going with that particular court case. Okay, but isn't that in essence also kind of we talk about double dipping because they're using. I mean, so I hear you saying you cannot use the same criteria, but essentially we're just summarizing the criteria and we're looking at it at a kind of a globular level. I mean, so
in that particular court case.
Yeah, in that particular court case. If you go in terms of what you're saying, you can't double dip. That principle of double dipping. I mean, to me that is, and I don't have an answer for that. It's just a comment I make. It's always I find that very confusing in a way because you're basically taking the collection or summary of those points, and then you measure it against something else. But from a business perspective, I agree with it. It's just this concept of this double dipping kind of almost conflicts
certainly,
with that in a way.
Certainly is an argument. And I think that we, the court has said on that one, and there's been quite a lot of discussion and debate around that. And I think Helen's paper was an interesting one, an important one to look at. Hey, silence. I think it's Brian. Hello, Brian.
Right.
You can go ahead, Brian. You've unmuted. We're not hearing you at the moment, so all we're getting is silence.
Silence would prefer that you call him silence.
Okay, silence. All right, microphone's not working there, silence. Maybe if you're able to, you can leave a comment in the chat box. So there we are. So this is just a little discussion around this concept of double dipping or double counting. And it's going to become an important one as you are reflecting on your preference system that you're going to use when you will have discretion as an organ of state as to how you will determine the 10 points or the 20 points. There is going to, it's your discretion. It's you as an organ of state can decide going forward whether you want to stick with the BBB scorecard or whether you want to have some other way of working out how you're going to come up with the 10 and the 20 points. And there's a whole range of different things. The key thing to remember when you are doing that is that if you include a criteria as a preference score, make sure that that criteria is not used in earlier evaluation sections to determine whether the bid is an acceptable bid, and it's not used in later sections to determine the objective criteria that will be used in the final award. Let's just quickly jump then to Silence's question. The question is, the legislation PPPFA separates qualification specification stage, acceptable bid, and then award preference objective criteria, thus you cannot dip. Double dipping is not allowed by legislation. Question, is that the discussion? So Silence, the answer to that one is it's not necessarily built, it's not stated in the regulation that you cannot use the same criterion in the acceptable bid stage as you can in the preference or the objective criteria stage. The Act doesn't say that. Fundamental public procurement principles say that. And it is borne out also in a number of different court cases that have been run. And most of the court cases, interestingly enough, all relate to objective criteria. So in my discussions yesterday with a couple of the lawyers, when I asked them about double dipping, the first thing they said was, do you mean in the context of objective criteria? And that was it. So there's a legal argument to this. Now, I did want to try and get some lawyers to come on, and this is from a particular document that was put together in 2019 by Lauren Kahn. From a pure legality perspective, this kind of double dips in the name of redress is clearly ultra-virus the empowering procurement of the Procurement Act and its underlying Section 217 Constitutional Blueprint. So saying, from a legal perspective, the whole notion of double dipping is very, very well understood. And this particular argument, this particular paper was actually arguing the fact that using pre-qualification criteria on BBBE is actually double dipping. And on that basis, there was quite a strong argument in the early stages of the Preferential Procurement Regulations 2017 to say that the notion of using triple BE as a qualification criteria and then also using it then as a preference score was actually double dipping, which was actually ultra virus. So that was that. There was also a reference in that particular paper as well to another court case where they looked at, this was for a municipality, and they looked at the functionality, and then they looked at price and preference, and then they looked at functionality again as the final deciding scoring mechanism. And in that particular court case, they said that that was wrong to do. So I didn't see, interestingly enough, in this paper reference to the one that Henry was making reference to on gee whiz, what's that case that Henry was talking to. So there we are. Silence. I hope that answers the question. Hi, Abigail.
Hi, Sean.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, and good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Sean, I just want to find out. I agree with what you've said, and I also agree to what Henry was saying, and especially on the interpretation of that court case related to the paper that Advocate Fender wrote. But my question that I want to ask is, in a case where we've got a tie, in the regulations of 2017, they had given, in the implementation guide, they had given us a guide to say how you would hang bids that got a tie, that you now go back and look at the BEE score and look at functionality score.
That's right.
Will this double dipping principle apply in that case, or it is different because in this case we have exhausted all the principles that apply, but then now you just need to make a decision?
So that, and I think Phoebe Bolton actually spoke about that in her paper on using functionality, that the only time that you could use functionality would be in that particular instance where there is a tie on the score. And she was saying that would be acceptable to use functionality in that case. So she was saying in her paper, if I recall correctly, that it is acceptable to use functionality under those conditions. Now, in the 2022 draft, you would know that that wasn't mentioned at all in the draft. And I don't expect it's going to be there in the final 2022 regs when they do come out. So I don't know, Abigail, if that's the question, if I've answered the question.
I think to maybe extend on that, Sean, is what do we need to do? I mean, so obviously from a policy perspective, because now the regulation is silent on, it's the new regulation.
Correct.
We must probably need to address something to that extent in our policies. What do we do in a case like that? Either in the policy or each and every tender, but yeah, it was probably better to kind of address it.
So you're suggesting then, Henry, that the organ of state could put in their policy that aspect to say that if there is a tie, then we award it to one that scores the highest preference points. Abigail, important distinction, the highest preference points, not necessarily the highest triple B points, the highest preference points, the one that scores the highest preference points. And then however, if the preference points are the same, then we would award it to the one that scores the highest functional points. You could put that in your policy, and that probably would be sufficient. In fact, I've often thought, Abigail, that little ruling that they built into the regulation is actually an objective criteria ruling. It's to say, if we get to this point, and there is more than one that scores the highest points, then the objective criteria would be the preference score, it would be a functional score. And on that basis, I thought if that is then objective criteria, that it would also potentially be double dipping. But I've not seen anything to say that that would not be allowed. So I think you could certainly put that into your policies. Go ahead, Abigail.
Okay, no, yeah, that's what we've done. We've included that in our policy, but then I just wanted to be sure now that is it contravening anything? Is it exposing us to any possible challenge in the process? But we do have that in our policy. We look at the preference points, we look at functionality, and then we go into drawing of lots. But,
right.
Yeah.
Good. Abigail, I don't know. What I'll do is just let me send you that paper by Phoebe Bolton. And you probably do have it, but that might just be the one to have a look at, just to get some comfort on that point. Well done. Glad to hear that there's activity happening on the development of preference policies. Okay, any other questions? I hope that everyone is still, if you haven't received exemption yet, that you are submitting your exemption applications. We are now well over 2 months since the Constitutional Court case decision on the 16th of February. And if you have not sought exemption from National Treasury and you are still not issuing tenders and quotations, I think you're at massive risk of a whole range of issues, including just not delivering on your mandates as an organization. So please do not hesitate to submit. I was involved in a discussion on yesterday morning, and was surprised that there's still organizations that have not submitted applications for exemption from the provisions within the Act, so that they can continue to procure. All right. It looks like there's maybe another question. Very good. There we are. Thank you. And thanks, Jana. That was the intention of this, is just to be sure that when you're putting the policy together, that you've bear these issues in mind, and particularly the issue of double dipping, no double dipping, and no double counting. And I've given you that international reference that you might want to consider as well. The international, let's just quickly go back to that. This is it here. These are the different papers and the different case law that you could potentially have a look at. And going forward, there we are, everybody. Very good. We'll get this onto the YouTube channel, and wish you all the best for the next while, as well as for the Freedom Day next Wednesday. And we'll see you then in the first Wednesday of May, and a very important discussion then on professionalization. All the best, everybody.